Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Friends, my name is Stephen Cady. I have the honor of serving as the president of Brite Divinity School. And I've learned that 25 years ago, it was 25 years ago that Brite had its first Jewish studies professor come in. We began the department, and it has been such an enriching relationship, such an enriching aspect of who we are as Brite Divinity School. This robust understanding of the theological depth that it has been able to provide students from Jewish backgrounds and students from Christian backgrounds and many other students, and we are so grateful. I'm particularly grateful that I get to work with Dr. Ariel Feldman. You will get to hear from him this evening. Many of you have heard from him before, but I find myself every time I hear him speak, learning something unique. Yes, about whatever it is that he's sharing, but also about him. You can get a sense of his heart and his depth and his soul through what it is that he shares. And so we are so grateful to have you here this evening. We're so grateful for all of you for coming out this evening. And it is my job to turn it over to Mr. Howard Rosenthal. Yes. Welcome, Dr. JD, as we've been told, Juris Doctorate. So please come on forward.
You had to hear the story. Anyway, good evening, and thank you for being here with us. I am Howard Rosenthal. I'm the Associate Director of the Jewish Federation of Fort Worth and Tarrant County. For a number of years, our federation has been fortunate to have an endowed fund established in the memory of Larry Kornbleet. The Kornbleet Scholar Lecture allows presentations such as this of talks relevant to our Jewish community. We've gathered here this evening to learn about ancient manuscripts, which, fortunate for us, are housed on this campus. This evening, I feel we have hit one out of the ballpark. Not only do we have a very interesting topic, which has its nexus right here at Brite Divinity and TCU, but we have an expert on the subject, again, right here in our midst. Our subject is People of the Book, Judaic Treasures. Our speaker is none other than Ariel Feldman, Rosalyn and Manny Rosenthal, Professor of Jewish Studies. Ariel, along with being a good friend of our federation, is a prominent academic here at Brite and TCU, specializes in Jewish studies, serving as the director, as was mentioned, of the Jewish Studies program. His research focuses on one of the most fascinating periods in Jewish history, the so-called Second Temple period. He has published several books and articles, most of which deal with what has been described as the greatest archaeological discovery of the 20th century, the Dead Sea Scrolls. He teaches courses on ancient Jewish history and literature. His research often focuses on historical texts and their implications for contemporary Jewish thought. I, for one, cannot wait to hear him walk us through the significance of the manuscripts housed right here on the TCU campus. Fascinating manuscripts and their relevance to Judaism today. Once again, tonight, we're going to be privileged to hear about these Judaic treasures from a true expert. And it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Ariel Feldman.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Barry. Where's Barry? Yeah. Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Cindy. She's not with us today here, but she has worked so much to make it all happen. So thank you, Cindy. On Brite's side, thank you, Tommy, Denitra, and Lauren, and you, our audience. Thank you for choosing to be here tonight and not somewhere else. So thank you for coming. I'm deeply honored to be invited to deliver this year's Kornbleet Lecture. It actually feels very appropriate that the lecture dedicated to the memory of the Kornbleet family, to Larry, takes place at Brite Divinity School and TCU. You may know that Kornbleet family, especially Marcia Kornbleet Couts, the wife of the late Larry Kornbleet, has supported the Jewish studies at TCU and Brite Divinity School in a myriad of ways, for which all of us here at Brite, and I'm personally very, very grateful. So thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the opportunity. A few years ago, the dean of the TCU library received the following inquiry. It says, "Dear Tracy, I'm an antique dealer based in London. I have a good client who is very eager to complete his set of the Bomberg Talmud. I see in your catalog that you hold a volume that he is missing and was wondering if you would consider selling it. I would be prepared to offer the substantial sum of $40,000 for this volume." The Talmud, as most of you here know from personal experience or from classes, is the most important text of the Jewish tradition. Still, $40K for a single volume of a book may sound as a bit too much, doesn't it? Maybe it is, but not for the Bomberg Talmud. In fact, I suggest that $40K is actually a low offer. He's going cheap here. In 2015, there was an auction of the entire set of the Bomberg Talmud, and the estimated price, as you can see on the slide, initially was between $5 and $7 million. In the end, it was sold for $9.3 million. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? We should have been investing in Jewish books and not S&P 500. So, given the fact that the set of the Babylonian Talmud printed by Daniel Bomberg is worth $9 million, the question is, how on earth it's possible that TCU Library has at least 3 volumes of that set? And you can make the math. The story goes back to someone who was really special, Dr. Rabbi Israel Otto Lehman. Our own Hollis Weiner, who is right here with us, wrote this beautiful story about him. It is in front of you in your handouts, so please take a look. According to the story, he was born in Berlin in 1912 and ordained as a rabbi in 1939 in a famous Jewish school for the science of Judaism, where such persons as Abraham Joshua Heschel of blessed memory was a student. 1939 was not a good year to be a rabbi in Berlin. He didn't wait for too long. He tried to escape as soon as possible, and he immigrated to UK, where he studied at Oxford and developed an interest in ancient Jewish manuscripts. When in the 1960s he comes to the US, he is looking for a job, and at some point in 1970, he actually gets one at the very important institution, the Hebrew Union College, the flagship institution of the Reformed Jewish movement in the US, where he becomes a curator of ancient manuscripts. Professor Rabbi David Aaron, who has been a guest of Brite at some point and a personal friend of Rabbi Mecklenburger, who is also here tonight, wrote to me remembering Rabbi Otto Lehman because they were friendly, and he took a course with Dr. Lehman. So he says the following about the collector. I believe he worked in Hebrew, Aramaic, Syriac, Sumerian, Akkadian, Ugaritic, Greek, Latin, and Farsi, which is Persian, Arabic. Of course, German was his mother tongue. He spoke English and French flawlessly. I also believe he wrote in Spanish. And he could recite pretty much any Italian libretto with understanding. He goes on to say, I think it is fair to say that he was eccentric, but a most gracious and gentle person. So here is for you a memory of Rabbi Dr. Otto Lehman. He traveled widely, acquiring the books for the library, and apparently he was a little bit guilty because he also bought books for himself. We ended up with a collection of books of 10,000 volumes when we think about Dr. Lehman. A huge collection. 25 years ago, when Brite hired its first Jewish studies professor, Dr. David Nelson, it became clear that it's a problem to teach Jewish studies at TCU and Brite because teaching Jewish experience, which is anchored in Jewish books without having Jewish books at the library, is almost impossible. So he knew Dr. Lehman from his studies at the same college, and when in 2001 Dr. Lehman was finally willing to part with his collection, David Nelson was right there. But where to get the money from? Well, 25 years later, it's a bit fuzzy. We don't know every detail, but we do know something. The Judaica section of the TCU library, if you ever walk through the library, is named after Jack Barry Friedman. Maybe you know this face. Mr. Friedman was a known philanthropist in this community. Apparently, his gift was helpful to purchase the books of the late Dr. Lehman. Also, when I came to Brite, I was told this story. It was actually part of my hiring process. This story was told by Dr. Williams, who used to be our president. He said that they were looking for money for this library to be purchased, and they were still missing $40,000, just 40,000. So they were looking for someone to help. And there was one person in this community who raised up to the challenge. Many of us will remember this remarkable woman, Rosenthal. The story goes that there was a dinner. David Nelson explained what needs to be done, and she wrote a check. Apocryphal story, true story? I think it is true story. If you ever have the time to visit the stalls of our library, you can never miss the Judaica section. Thousands and thousands of students and faculty have benefited from the books in that particular section and from the generosity of those who helped to acquire those books. In Jewish tradition, we say when someone leaves us, Zichronam Livracha, may their memory be a blessing. These books have really been a blessing for so many students in memory of these two precious folks. Well, let's get back to the Babylonian Talmud printed by Daniel Bomberg. What's so special about it to make it such an expensive item, $9.3 million? Well, have you ever been to Venice? You would like to raise your hands if you have. Well, if you haven't, let's go. It's on us tonight. So imagine yourself a warm night, crowds of tourists, maybe your favorite gelato. Not sure about the gelato, though. We're on 1515. Not sure how about gelato at that point of time. But think about yourself arriving to Venice along with a young man. His name, as we know it in English, is Daniel Bomberg, but his real name is Daniel van Bombergen. He's from Antwerp, today's Belgium, and he's from a very wealthy family, a family that made their fortune in dealing with spices and fine arts. They bought and sold tapestries and paintings, and they're also very much into relatively new trade. It's not stock market, of course. It is printing. Printing is the new discovery of Europe at this time. But why Venice, you may ask? Well, Venice is going to be a place where the printing press that has been just invented will make a real history, because Venice will become the printing capital of Europe for quite a while. It will change the world, and our friend Daniel Bomberg would like to be a part of it. He probably would like to have a cut of that beautiful promise of business that is in front of him. And he's a good businessman, so he's knowing what he's doing. But he's not just another business guy who wants the money. He's also a Christian Hebraist. And this phrase, Christian Hebraist, may sound a little bit weird to our ears, because Christian is Christian and Hebraist means Hebrew, something about Judaism. So is it Christian Jewish? What does exactly that phrase mean? This is a funny term scholars use to explore and explain an interesting phenomenon in the time of our friend Daniel Bomberg, 15th century, 16th century, 17th century, the Renaissance period, when lots of Christians become very, very interested in all things Jewish. Languages, texts. You're thinking the Bible. Yes, the Bible too, but not only the Bible. Texts such as Talmud are very interesting for them. And especially so, the Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical lore, is alluring and inviting their interest. Because they seem to think that all these texts that Jews have, since it's such an ancient and important part of the Christian story as well, must be authentic and original, just as the Bible is. There's no yet historical perspective on the origins of Kabbalistic texts, on the timing of the Talmud, so the interest is very, very deep. He arrives to Venice and he would like to print books, but not just any books. Daniel Bomberg wants to print Jewish books. If you're thinking this is a crazy idea, perhaps you're right. Why to print Jewish books? Well, it's actually not a crazy idea at all. It's an excellent business move, because there is a thirsty market for Jewish texts. First of all, from Jewish communities around, but also from those Christian Hebraists, those Christian scholars who would like to have an access to this text that they perceive as important way to get to the truth including the truth of Christianity. In 16th century Venice, if you would like to print a book, you will have to have a few permissions obtained. I think we have a couple of lawyers in this audience, so this is for you guys. What kind of permissions? Well, you need a permission from the local authority, which is the city, but you also need a permission from this person. Who is this? This is Pope Leo X. A permission from a pope needs to be granted to print Jewish books, and Daniel Bomberg is crazily successful because he obtains the permission from the city, and he receives also the imprimatur, the permission to print from the Pope himself. Pope Leo X happens to be a humanist, someone who is really interested in all that pursuit after ancient knowledge. So he's okay with printing Jewish books, including the Talmud. Think about it, the Pope who wanted to print the Talmud. Our friend Daniel Bomberg is not the first one to print Jewish books, but Bomberg accomplishes something that no one was able to accomplish before. He prints about 200 titles of different Jewish texts, and some say as many as 240, ranging from the writings of Maimonides to small prayer book community books which communities of Jews around brought to him and asked him to print for them. He does it all. Bomberg, if you like, is a Steve Jobs of his times. He's not just a businessman, he's an artist too. He wants special fonts for his books. We've just seen some of them. It's a beautiful print. He wants the best paper. He wants the best ink. He really wants the best product. That's why his books are aging so well. So the Babylonian Talmud that he printed is so valuable for a couple of reasons. The first reason, only 16 full sets survive. That drives the price up, of course. But there's also something about it that you probably will know if you ever had to use the Talmud. The Talmud page looks nothing like the page of the Bible. When we refer to passages from the Talmud, we never refer to them by chapter and verse, right? We refer to them by a folio page, say tractate such and such, folio such and such, side A. There's a different way of referring to Talmudic passage. And this is having to do with this beautiful setup with the Mishnah being in the middle, the Gemara being on the side, the commentary by Rashi being on the other side. This is a beautiful, very familiar setup of the page of the Talmud. Who is responsible for that setup that Orthodox Jews, and maybe some of us here, are studying every day? This is Daniel Bomberg, my friends. He is the one who set up the page of the Talmud. So his print of the Talmud has not only a value because of it's so rare, but also because of its importance and sentimental value. Now, the Talmud is an enormous text. I'm told that unless you start learning it very young, you will never master it. That's why I've never tried. It's mostly in Aramaic. It's not in Hebrew, and a particular dialect of Aramaic, which we call the Babylonian Aramaic. So Bomberg mastered some Hebrew, which is interesting. We have some letters from Daniel Bomberg, which he writes to his friend in Rome, and his Hebrew is pretty good. I'm actually very impressed. But Aramaic, Babylonian Aramaic, and Aramaic of the Talmud, it's a different world. So how does he accomplish it? How is it possible to print so many books for the Jewish communities and Christian Hebraists without having the knowledge of the language and tradition? Well, he lives in Venice. Are we all familiar with the word ghetto? Yeah, that's where the word ghetto comes from. The very first ghetto was in Venice, a little area segregated from the rest of the city where the Jews could settle and live. It's an interesting place to visit. It's actually worth it to visit and see how cramped and busy the life in the ghetto might have been. So what he does, he hires Jews from the ghetto to come to his workshop and do the printing work. If you were a Jewish person in Venice in the 16th century, when you step up from your ghetto, you will have to wear this yellow cap, as you can see on this image on the left. Yellow cap is the signal that you're Jewish. Daniel Bomberg makes it happen that his workers who come to the shop every day don't have to wear this cap. He received a special permission for them to walk through the cities of Venice unmolested without being detected as Jewish. He also invents a new role for his press, which sounds very familiar to us today, editor-in-chief, but there was none before. And who is his editor-in-chief or editors-in-chiefs? He hires best of the scholars he could have gotten to work with him. And one of them is really very interesting. He has a long name. Be ready for it. Jacob ben Chaim ben or Ibn Adoniah. Let's talk a little bit about Jacob ben Chaim ibn Adoniah. Long name, we can shorten it to Ibn Adoniah. The story of Jacob begins with a place where most of us perhaps haven't been, North Africa, Tunisia. He is from Tunisia and he is moving to Venice at some point because of particular circumstances of his life. If you have your handouts in front of you, this is page number 3 on the handout, and you can follow what he tells us about himself and how he ends up to be in the shop of Mr. Bomberg. So Ibn Adoniah shares with us, I was dwelling quietly in my house and flourishing in my abode, prosecuting diligently my studies at Tunis. Do you all have it? Page number 3. When fate removed me to the west, but did not withdraw its hand from afflicting me, and afterwards brought me to the famous city of Venice. It's a beautiful poetical language, but he doesn't say anything about what happened, doesn't he? He really doesn't disclose the details, but it seems that something happened. There's a reference to fate, there is a reference to affliction. For some reason, he has to leave his hometown and he moves to Venice. And that's where he stays, and he is still afflicted, he says. And after about 3 months of suffering, I felt for a little while the furnace of affliction. As I was walking in the streets, wandering quietly, behold, God sent a highly distinguished and pious Christian of the name of Daniel Bomberg to meet me. He brought me to his printing press and showed me through his establishment, saying to me, turn in, abide with me, for here you will find the rest for your soul and balm for your wound. And I want you, and here is the task, here's the job description. I want you to revise the books which I print, correct the mistakes, purify the style, and examine the works till they are as refined silver and purified gold. That's a beautiful job description. All the professors present here would like to agree that that's what we expect from our students here. Just as silver and purified gold. That's the expectation. Apparently, this was an offer that Jacob could not refuse. So he takes the offer. He is the one who is responsible for printing the Talmuds, the works of Maimonides, and many, many other titles. But what really made him famous is not the Talmud, although we talked about the Talmud for $9.3 million. But what really made him famous is a different printing job that he executes for Mr. Bomberg. And that's where we go into another part of his story. At some point, he comes to Bomberg with a proposition. He says, we need to publish a new edition of the Jewish Bible, of the Hebrew Bible. This is a strange proposition because just 7 years earlier, Bomberg already published a beautiful edition of the Bible. You see it on the slide. It's called Rabbinic Bible 1. Sounds like a rocket, but it's not. Rabbinic Bible 1 is a beautiful edition of the Bible because it has this great idea, and we saw that book just earlier today in the library. It has the Hebrew text in the middle, Aramaic translation on the side, and then Jewish commentators' work around the page. So that if you're working on a particular passage from the Bible, it's all for you there on a single page of a folio. So Jacob argues that this wasn't good enough. Why wasn't it good enough? His main argument seems to be, you know what, it lacks the Masoretic notes. Do you know what the Masoretic notes are? If you do, you are a champion of today's night. It's a very unusual thing even to know what Masoretic notes are. So let's talk about them just for a second. If you ever have had a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, or if you ever observed a bar or bat mitzvah happening, you know that the scariest part of the service, and we have a couple of rabbis here who can attest to this, the scariest part of the service for the young girl or young boy is the reading from the Torah scroll, isn't it? Remember? Remember yours? Remember your kids, your grandkids? Why is it so scary? Because it's difficult to read the text of the Hebrew Bible from the scroll, because the text doesn't have vowels, it doesn't have punctuation, it's just pure consonantal text, correct? All agree? So how do you go about this? Well, maybe you talk to your rabbi and he suggests a tutor, and then the tutor can help you to manage the text, the proper pronunciation, the chanting, and the rest of it. But if you're willing to do it on your own, You probably will go and get a printed version of the Torah, such as this, where all these missing parts appear all of a sudden. We have the dots for punctuation, we have the dots for vowels, and we also have weird signs, which look weird, for chanting or proper pronunciation of the text. So all this is there, but it's not in the scroll. So where does it come from? If it's not from the scroll that we use in the synagogue today or in that time, where does it come from? It comes from something like this. It comes from a Masoretic codex. This is a beautiful image of Codex Leningrad, the most complete and ancient codex of the entire Hebrew Bible, today in the possession of Russian Federation in St. Petersburg. So Masoretic Codex, if you take a look at this, has all of those little signs, all of these little things that are present also in print, but it also has a little bit more. Look between those two columns you see on the image. Do you see little signs in between? Some of you who have studied Hebrew will probably recognize the letter Lamed. A tiny Lamed here, a tiny Lamed there. Do you see those? This is for Aramaic leta, which means once. Someone who is copying this manuscript is saying to us, there is a word in this particular phrase, on this particular verse, and particular line, that occurs only once. Only once where? Maybe in this particular book, such as Genesis, or perhaps in the entire Torah, or perhaps in the entire Hebrew Bible. Think about the memory these people had. If you could remember that this word occurs only once. What's the idea? The idea is that by creating these notes, the process of copying and preserving the text is very, very precise. Nothing is lost. The text is very carefully copied thanks to those notes that serve as sort of signs at the road. Stop, pause, slow down, remember. So all these are called Masoretic notes because they've been introduced into the text sometime between the 5th and 10th century CE by families of scholars, scribes who lived in Tiberias, in Babylonia, in different places, and they were called Masoretes because they were transmitting the tradition, and tradition in Hebrew is Masorah or Masoret. So that's how we have them, and that's why they're so interesting. So you're asking, why do I have to know about all this? Why is it so important? Ibn Adoniah comes to Mr. Bomberg and says, your previous Bible doesn't have all this stuff. It's not good enough. I'm telling you from experience, and I have at least 2 Hebrew Bible scholars here in the audience, that when we're teaching Hebrew Bible here at Brite, very rarely we mention that this exists. Even less so, we refer to them or talk to them in any length. Is that correct, folks? Yeah? They're nodding, they're agreeing. This is a very unusual claim to make to the printer, to the owner of the shop, that we have to redo the whole print because you haven't had this little comments in place inside your edition of the Hebrew Bible. More than that, no one has done it before. No one has printed these little notes in a printing shop. Imagine the amount of work it will require. So Bomberg is actually willing to entertain the idea. And Ibn Adoniah writes, he says, Bomberg did all in his power to send into all the countries, I think he's exaggerating a little bit, all the countries in order to search out what might be found about the Masorah. And praise be the Lord, we obtained as many of the Masoretic books as possibly could be got. He was not backward, and his hand was not closed, nor did he draw back his hand from producing gold out of his purse to defray the expenses of the books and of the messengers. In short, it works. Bomberg made a good case. And that's what we have now. We have this beautifully made Rabbinic Bible number 2. It made Bomberg famous. It made Ibn Adoniah famous because, friends, this is the Bible that is going to be printed and reprinted. Its main Hebrew text is going to serve both Jews and Christians for about 400 or 500 years. This is the Textus Receptus, as we call it, the received text, the most authoritative text of the Hebrew Bible. So that's what made Ibn Adoniah really famous, at least in some circles. Now, back to this question, why to make such a big deal about this Masorah thing? I mean, there's lots of Jewish folks in this audience, and according to what I saw from your faces, you didn't care much about it. You didn't learn much about it earlier on. So why to care so much? Why is it so important? It's an interesting question to consider because think, this is business. We're talking about a huge investment and now a most famous Jewish book ever. So what happened with the layman's books when they arrived to Brite 25 years ago is that layman books sat for a long time in boxes. When I came to Brite 15 or 16 years ago, Hollis Weiner, who is again here, met me for a cup of coffee, and she told me in a simple way, she said, you have to do something about it. You have to get those books out and take care of them. And I have to confess, I did not. I got busy with other things. I was busy with making all kinds of other decisions in my work. So guilty as charged, Hollis. But then at some point, the TCU library hires Dr. Julie Christensen, who was our rare book librarian until recently, who began to get those books out of the crates and boxes and whatever it was. So as she was working on this, she came across this curious book, which I would like you to meet for a second. At the first sight, it was nothing remarkable. Actually, it's not remarkable at all. This is a small book. And within this book, you have two Jewish texts bound together. At some point, the binder decided to bound these two books together and create one volume. What was really interesting is not what's inside, but what was on the ends of the book, the so-called fly leaves or the end pages, which are not printed as you can see. They are inscribed by hand. They come from a manuscript. Signs of water damage, which you can see probably closer on the next slide, suggest that that was a manuscript that at some point was damaged by water, was discarded, and then recycled to create binding for this new book. This is not a new phenomenon, and you may have heard about this. We have all over Europe and also the US, this phenomenon that scholars, when they X-ray or work with ancient books, especially Christian books, all kinds of remains of Jewish manuscripts pop up from the bindings and from the covers, because that's how they did it. They recycled ancient materials because they were pricey. They could be recycled. So Julie sends these photographs to me, lucky me, and I share these images with my wife, Faina, who is also here. And we got to work because we got really curious what these pages were. The first step was to identify the script and try to date it. Maybe it's recent, maybe it's ancient, we don't know. Maybe it's ancient as Jesus, who knows? So let's explore. So Faina spent about 2 nights comparing what she could find on the internet from the known manuscripts, digitized and placed on the web, with this one. And she said at some point, this is 16th century. You know, for me who deals with Dead Sea Scrolls, this is very young. Dead Sea Scrolls are 2,000 years old. This is only 400 years old, but still very interesting. We got an expert from Jerusalem to confirm this. The expert from Jerusalem said this is a semi-cursive Sephardic script, which means it comes from Spain, Italy, Turkey, or some other place, late 16th, early 17th century. The second step was to decipher what's in. And one of the first phrases we were able to read with some certainty was, I'm going to die. That's an interesting statement in the text. So we're thinking maybe this is someone's last will and testament, and the next line will tell us where they hid their jewels and their gold bricks and you know, whatever treasures there might be. Nothing of that kind happened, unfortunately. What we realized as we went through the text, that this is a passage from the book of Genesis. Remember the story of Isaac having 2 sons? Remember their names? One is Jacob and the other is? Esau. Very cool. So Esau says to his brother, I'm going to die. I don't need this firstborn status I have. Let's trade it. I get your soup and you get my rights. A famous story. So this is the passage that the leaf in front of you is actually citing. And then what it does, it builds a little commentary around it. But the kind of commentary which I, for one, have never seen before. So here is an example. And please stay with me. Don't disconnect right away. It may sound very frightening and boring, but it's not actually. It's very interesting. It's in front of you in the handouts. So what's in front of you is a text which quotes a passage from the Bible, and then another passage from the Bible, another passage from the Bible. And it says at some point at the very top, 5 words with 2 cantillation marks, Tlisha and 2 gerish. Remember the cantillation marks that help us to read the Torah? And you can see that little image in front of you on the handout or on my slide here. This is the 2 or 3, those cantillation marks together, Tlisha and gerish. So there are 5 places in the entire Bible, somebody counted, where this constellation of these marks occur. And the little notes for us, it's Genesis, it's Leviticus, it's Ezekiel, it's Zephaniah, and then Ezekiel again. Someone was counting and mindful of this. Apparently, the thinking is, this is God's word. If in one place and another place and three more places, this constellation of these important marks occur, it might have a meaning. It's important. So what they do next, they create a little sermon around those 5 passages, which is almost impossible to do, because think about 5 different texts given to you from all kinds of places in the Bible, and you have to write a coherent text around it. That's a real mission. We have to try it at Brite at some point for our students, our faculty. So what they do, they actually do it very nicely in the text. Just one example for you. Do we all remember the story of Noah and the flood? So the story is very famous, but rarely do we remember the story of how Noah is born. In Genesis 5, at the very end of the chapter, his father, when the kid is born, says, "This one will provide us relief from our work and from the toil of our hands out of the very soil which the Lord placed under a curse." So the father is enthusiastic, the kid will bring a blessing to all of us, but Hebrew scholars, Jewish scholars are asking a question. I mean, we all have kids probably. How did he know? I mean, how did he know that Noah will bring all these blessings? So this little text in front of us, when my wife and I are working through it, provide the following explanation. I think you might like it. So it says, "You should know and understand that our sages said in Midrash that until Noah was born, the hand of the human beings was like a foot of a goose." Can you imagine a foot of a goose? No division of fingers. It's a flat hand, one surface. Until Noah had come and the fingers became separated so that he made a plow. You see, his hand is transformed. He can make a plow. And then with that plow, he's able to provide a relief from the curse which God has placed on the human beings. How is that for a story? This is a midrash, of course, a Jewish midrash, but you see what it does? It plays with that idea because it says, for the plow looks like a tlisha at 2 garish sides. Remember those little signs we've mentioned just before? It does look like a bit like a plow from the 17th, 18th century. So here's your creative minds working with a biblical text and creating solutions. So that's solution number 1. But it goes further and says something else, and this is in the next passage in front of you. It says, "But to proceed according to our custom," and apparently the custom is to go from midrash to a more deep explanation of the text. To proceed is our custom in a mystical manner. It has been said, for the sages of Kabbalah said, remember Kabbalah? For the soul, when it leaves the body, has no merit. When the soul goes, it has no merit. It's neutral. And here we come into the world of reincarnation. For some of us who are interested in Jewish mysticism, we know that Kabbalists are very deep into this idea of reincarnation. Some say that the soul of a man or a woman can come back as many as 1,000 times. Some say it come back only for 3 times. It come back as a human. It come back as an animal. There are all kinds of options on the table. So it says in the text, "And it spreads the soul and goes here and there until the Holy Blessed be He brings it back in a different body, so it may become pure and will return to its place." So the goal is to rest from the reincarnation. And if it is a man, it will come back once again, as the verse says, the book of Job, 2 or 3 times to a man. Yet if the soul is pure, it does not have to come back and enter another body. As it is said, "This one will provide us with relief from our work and from the toil of our hands." That's the passage from Genesis about Noah. So this is the text we were able to decipher. We, of course, got very excited because when you find such a remarkable text, you really get excited about asking all kinds of questions. But what it immediately did to me is to help me to think and understand why Daniel Bomberg and Ibn Adonijah had that conversation about a different printing of the Bible. You see, this little passage shows to you how important for the scholars these little signs have been. The Masoretic notes, the Masoretic signs are not taken just as tools for me and you to read the Torah as we get ready for Bar Mitzvah, whatever task is in front of us, but it's actually perceived as a part of the text. So much so that if you Google it a little bit more, you will find that in 16th century and 17th century, Jews and Christians have a huge argument within themselves whether these signs are a part of God's word as it was given to Moses on Sinai, or it's a later addition. It is so wonderful to see them quarrel about it, because looking back with our knowledge of history, we know that they've been added at some point by those Masoretic scribes, but this is not something that they agree on and understand equally. So we understand why Ibn Adonijah is making the case, and we understand why Bomberg is agreeing, because you see, in Kabbalistic teachings, all these little signs receive even more importance than just in plain understanding of the text. And Bomberg is a Christian Hebraist. He's interested in Kabbalistic stuff. All right, so back to all that work that we have been doing with those stained by water leaves. The first question after was to ask, so what is it? So if you were to find a text in English, in German or French, in Hebrew and Aramaic that you don't know how to identify, what would you do? You will look for an expert, right? But we felt that we have no expert around us. It was late night. So we decided, instead of asking our rabbi, to ask Rabbi Google. A Google search, when we introduced the text into the line of search, quickly produced a partial match with our book from a writing of a very famous Kabbalist. It seems like I have to talk about Kabbalah all the night tonight. So let me talk a little bit about this famous guy. His name might sound very, very new, but if you were studying Kabbalah, you would know his name rather well. His name is Rabbi Abraham ben Mordechai Azulai. Maybe I can just abbreviate and say Rabbi Azulai. He was born in Morocco, in the city of Fez, in 1570. But when he's about 40 years old, he decides to leave his home, his comfortable home in Fez, in Morocco, and he takes a boat to Eretz Israel, or to Palestine. Why he's taking a boat, which is a perilous journey in those times, because there are no flights, even if the prices today are very expensive. He takes a boat because there's no other way to travel, and he wants to get there because he wants to study with another famous Kabbalist of whom he has heard and read his works. So he takes this risky journey, and the journey is indeed risky because he tells in one of his writings that while he was in the boat, there was a mighty storm. What can you do in 1613 when you have a mighty storm in the middle of the sea? I suppose the same thing you would do today. He prayed. Thank you. He prayed. And apparently he felt that his prayers were answered because the boat safely reached the land, the shore. He and his family disembark from the boat. They leave everything behind because they're in a rush to get on the safe ground, as you can imagine. When they wake up the next morning, the boat is gone. And nobody knows why. Is it pirates? Is it just another storm that took the boat away? So he writes in his writings that all of our stuff has gone, but the only thing I was really sad about, my books, feels close to home. His books, just like Otto Lehmann or anybody else here who likes their library. All the rest, he says, was a ransom for our souls. He didn't have any particular regrets about losing his stuff. So he arrives to the promised land, but he carries with him the signature of his forever. Do you see what it looks like? Does it look like a small boat to you? This is a little boat of Rabbi Abraham Azulai. That's how he signs his books, his documents. That's to remember that special moment when he was saved in the middle of the sea. He arrives to the promised land, he settles in Hebron, but then the plague comes and he escapes to Jerusalem. And then the plague comes to Jerusalem. He is about to escape again, but he writes that I made a pledge to God. What's his pledge? He says, God, if you save me and my family, think what's the promise? I'll write you a book, he says. What a wonderful promise. I'll write you a book. So he is indeed safe and sound. He reaches the city of Gaza. He settles in Gaza. He is not affected by the plague. And he writes a new book, which really puts him on the map of the Kabbalistic studies forever. He writes a book which is called Hesed LeAvraham, Mercy to Abraham. And this is a very important text to this very day. But 3 months later, apparently like some of us here, he cannot stop writing. So he writes another book. And he says that this book is going to be a commentary on the entire Bible. It takes him only 2 months to write the commentary to the entire Bible. Does that sound real to you? Is that possible at all? I mean, even if you're a genius and you have a phenomenal memory, as many of those folks had, it's still almost impossible. So the truth is that Rabbi Azulai, when he writes, he uses sources, and there's no hesitation about plagiarism at all in his works. So he uses sources, and what's interesting that in his introduction, he mentions that one of the sources he used was a commentary written by somebody else. He doesn't name them, unfortunately. Maybe it's a trick on his part. The commentary which was using the Masoretic notes. So when we compared his commentary, when he copies those passages from his source and our little text that we found in the binding of the book, there was a perfect match. So we decided that that's what we have. We have here his lost source. And how remarkable it is that it turned up 400 years later in Fort Worth, Texas, of all places, in Fort Worth, Texas, Christian University, Brite's TCU library. To conclude, I'm very sorry to break it to you that investing in Jewish books is no more an option for you. It's like investing in Apple now and not in 1976. So don't think about it. It's a bad idea. However, it is still a good idea, not too late for all of us, to study these books. After all, Jews have been called in the Muslim world the people of the book. That's how we have been known, just as our Christian brothers and sisters. These books define Jewish identity for more than 2,000 years. And here at Brite, we're trying to make our little tiny contribution to this gigantic task. We're studying this ancient Jewish texts one at a time. And we are the only seminary in Texas to have Jewish studies program, and only few of the seminaries in the US and in the world that happens to have it. So on behalf of the Jewish studies program at Brite and TCU, let me say to you, friends and family here, thank you very much. Thank you to Fort Worth community, Jewish community, for sharing with us your gifts, your spiritual and material gifts, your books, and allowing us to make it happen. This is also a moment for me to thank all those who take such a good care of these books at the library. Here is Julie Christensen unrolling the scroll that you and I have seen today in the library, a beautiful Persian scroll that we have on display. Julie is pursuing other things this day, but she is really the one who made it all come out from those boxes. And then there is Mary Saffel, Zaina Bingham, Samantha Brown, Ellison Kirchner, Amanda Gomez, Kiri Menchaca, and our own Dr. Joe McDonald, who is also here right now. Thank you all, and thank you for listening. We may have a minute or two for questions, and then I think Howard will come up.
Questions? David, you have a question?
Oh, well, Professor Feldman, that was terrific. Wonderful talk you gave us and giving us meaning of how to understand the tradition. And when you write about evolution of or the development of the tradition and how Jews link the Talmud to the oral tradition or the Gemara that comes after the Mishnah, how do you teach that or approach that subject? Because you're going to the second, the destruction of the temple period, and then we're looking centuries later. And I just wanted to see if you might comment on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. It's a great question. It actually points to some of the strengths and weaknesses of any Jewish studies program, which you will pick at your leisure and look into it. We'll have to make choices, right? Whatever we teach in this institution or other institutions around us, we'll always have to make choices and choose things that are more important or more relevant for our students. So when the program was established here under the name of Rosenthal and Manny Rosenthal, the idea was that Brite and TCU will hire someone who may have knowledge of everything Jewish, but they wanted something very specific. And the idea was, think about a seminary setting, right? Seminary is training future ministers, folks who will work within churches or community institutions and organizations. These folks in the seminary, Christian seminary setting will usually come with knowledge of the Hebrew Bible and New Testament. So what they really need is to understand the transition period between these two periods in their story, the story that they share with us, the Jewish folks, the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, and the story of the New Testament. So the idea was to hire someone who can teach the period of Second Temple Judaism. Unfortunately, that would sort of limit the possibilities of teaching later Jewish texts, such as the Talmud or Maimonides or Kabbalah. So with Dr. Katie's permission, I do get to teach those things from time to time, in addition to teaching Second Temple Jewish literature and the texts. And this happens in this wonderful course that is called Introduction to Judaism, in which we have in one semester cover everything from creation to today's events in the US. This is a wonderful run, and students really get a good stuff for their money. So that's my answer. Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Anyone else?
No questions is a great sign. Everyone is agreeing, which is very unusual for a Jewish audience. We never agree on anything.
How would you characterize the state of the collection, especially in special collections? Is there more stuff that needs work? Is there more stuff that needs to be brought into the light? Stuff we don't know much about that we should work on?
Thank you. This is a question coming from someone who works at the library and knows exactly what's going on. So thank you, Joe. That's a nice softball for me. So it's interesting that although the collection has been there for 25 years and so much work was done on it, just recently, Fain and I had the chance to sit with some of the books that have not been cataloged yet or have not been fully cataloged. And I was sharing with folks who came to see the books that it felt like a Christmas day, or if you would like a Hanukkah celebration, whatever you pick. We had a huge table full of boxes, small boxes prepared for individual books. And we walked through the books and opened the boxes and saw what's there. So we saw quite a few things that are not yet fully discovered. And some of them are interesting. The small leaflets about the kosher way of slaughtering an animal appropriately. There are texts in Judeo-Arabic in which Jews in the Muslim world were writing. There are more texts apparently from a community which seems to be a Yemenite Jewish community. So there is work to do. We tried the best we could to identify those, but we'll have to leave that to the experts because unfortunately, unlike Dr. Lehman, I know only a few languages which are really required for this sort of task.
Don't think I need a microphone. How much do we know?
It's fine.
I think I have enough voice without a microphone, but anyway, how much do we know about Bomberg's helper, the Tunisian Jew, and his background and where he got all this knowledge?
It's a great question. Unfortunately, we know very, very little. It seems that he had a very traditional Jewish upbringing, apparently a great schooling in his youth, but he doesn't share much about himself. He writes a whole introduction to this important work about his Bible that he's printing for Bomberg, but he says only what you have seen in this little quotation we have seen earlier on. But what's interesting, and this is a part of this difficult Christian-Jewish dynamics in the medieval Europe, including Italy, interestingly enough, at some point, he apparently converts into Christianity. We don't know the details of his decision. We don't know why and how and what are the reasons. But at some point, he is referred by his Jewish peers as someone they don't want really to think about anymore. So the conclusion is apparently that he becomes a Christian person. And there's lots of controversy within the small circles of scholars who work on this topic. What might have led someone to embrace Christianity while working on all these Jewish texts, right? And what's interesting that the preceding editor-in-chief, the previous guy who was in charge, also converted into Christianity. So there's a question, was there a pressure? Maybe a pressure from the boss? Folks seem to be unsure about it because Bomberg seems to be such an open and collaborating person from what we know. But one another reason that has been noted is that both this friend of ours, Daniel, Ibn Adoniya and his preceding scholar, I'm now kind of thinking about his name, his Pratensis or something, both were involved in study of Kabbalah. And there is one interesting feature that Kabbalah was one of those fields of study in this period of time where the lines between Judaism and Christianity got a little bit blurred, because Kabbalah takes us into the worlds of the divine, which perhaps allow more flexibility. So maybe that might have been one of the entry points for him to become a Christian person later on. So that's all we know, that he was a wonderful scholar with great knowledge. And then at some point, he decides to leave his Judaism. So we remember him for his books and his great contribution, but we know very, very little.
Thank you. That was wonderful and fascinating from beginning to end. A question, Dr. Lehman, when I met him, didn't seem like a rich man. I mean, he did all right. He made a salary and such. Where did he get the money to buy books that turned out to be worth millions of dollars each? Does he leave us any notes on where these materials came from?
That's a great question. Hollis Weiner here and we have been exchanging emails about the sources of the funding to purchase the library. But I think we know almost nothing about the sources of his income, right? He was not a highly paid individual. Is that right, Hollis?
He saved his money. He okay, yes, he was single, he was frugal. When he got this, first of all, when he got this job at Hebrew Union College, he had a budget to travel all over Europe and the Far East, and he had a good budget to buy manuscripts. And he used it. He spent every penny of it. And and he got some grant. He had a Guggenheim grant for a while. He wanted to have an encyclopedia of manuscripts, of ancient manuscripts. And that was what he worked on the rest of his life. He never did finish it, but he was always applying for more grants to continue writing it and writing it. And he got reparations because he had from Germany, because he was there under the when the Nazis invaded. And he put the money in an Irish bank. It must have gotten really good interest. And he didn't pay his bills on time. And he would always, and he was always being done, you didn't pay your bills, how come? And he would blame it on the Irish banks. He didn't want to invest in British pounds, Irish money for some reason. And so he didn't spend very much. He lived frugally. Even in Cincinnati, he was in a 4th floor walk-up. So what did he do with his money? Well, he saved it. And so he saved it for manuscripts is what I would think. If I may, I wanted to tell a story about the Bomberg Talmud. My extended my family has a Bomberg set up, the Bomberg Talmud. My grandparents were in Lithuania when World War I broke out, and the family fled. And what did Grandpa want to take? The main thing he wanted was his Talmud. So they put the Talmud on a cart and they go, and everybody was fleeing to Minsk. And when they got to Minsk, where were they going to stay? Oh, they stayed like on the dirt floor of a giant synagogue. And they stayed in Minsk for quite a while. And then when the war came, when World War I came to Minsk, then they had to flee again. And so they get on the train and they went to Kharkov. And when today we say it Kharkiv in Ukraine. And there were so many people waiting for the train. It always makes me think of a scene from Gone with the Wind when nobody knows where to go and everybody's fleeing. And the only thing they had room for when they did get on the next train was the books. And how are they going to protect the books? So my grandma cut up the tent. They were in a canvas tent. And she cut it up into big strips and she got a bolt of linen and they wrapped the whole set of Talmuds. I don't know how many books are in a set of Talmuds. How many?
Could be 10, could be 12, could be 16,
Okay,
depends.
They wrapped it in linen. And they kept it that way. And then they ended up going to Rostov. And then after the war, they come back to Lithuania. I won't go through too much more of that. And finally, after many years, they get to America. And there they are at Ellis Island going through customs. And, the people they're afraid of bringing lice into America or germs. And so everybody had to be sprayed to kill the lice. And they wanted to spray this package wrapped up in linen with the Talmuds and he threw a fit. He just threw a fit and someone intervened and they did not spray the Talmuds. So he brought the Talmuds to Lorain, Ohio. And the end of the story is that one of my first cousin's sons is now a rabbi, and the family rebound the books. And we have a picture of them. And anyway, so our set lives. And when I wrote about, I wrote my family's story, I wrote an article about it for the American Jewish Archives Journal. And they were the ones who made me realize how important Bomberg was. I didn't know, but Bomberg, yes, they knew. And they were all very impressed. They probably, I don't know, corrected my spelling or however I was describing it. And so we have it. And it's still being used, just like what we saw upstairs. And next time I see you, I'll bring you the frontispiece from one of the volumes.
Excellent. So indeed, people of the book, thank you very much.
Well, I'm not Howard, but Howard, I want to thank you for working so closely with Ariel and making this program happen. Dr. Katie, we really appreciate being here at Brite Divinity. I think our Jewish community is very fortunate to have the kind of relationship we do with Brite, with TCU. A lot of unique things happen because of it. So I do want to thank everybody on behalf of the Federation for coming this evening. I don't think I introduced myself, but I'm Barry Abels. I'm the CEO of the Federation. And we're so happy to put this program on. We have not done a Kornbleet lecture in at least 3.5 years. And we're very glad that this is the first one we've done after that period of time. And thank you so much for your work and your scholarship. And thank you all so much for coming, students, professors, faculty, Jewish community. Have a wonderful evening, safe drive home, and thank you again for coming.